All right, everybody, and welcome to the first Inside Laravel live stream. Um, for those that don't know me, my name's Davey Shafik. I am a software engineer, have been doing this for about 25 years, predominantly PHP and sort of the, surrounding stack, MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, and all those sorts of things. I'm a contributor to PHP internals. Was the release manager for PHP 7.1 and the creator of the FAR archive format. If you don't know me, you probably know my work. I also have several books that I published. I was the author of the Zen Certification Study Guide when that was still a thing. And I've been using Laravel for about 6 years now. In the last 4 years, I've been using it in my day job and have been sort of bending it to my will. So my goal here is ultimately I want to write some sort of more advanced Laravel content. And I realized that there's a little bit of a bridge missing between the very basic documentation type stuff, the use the thing reference that you can see on screen right now, the Laravel docs, which are great and pretty comprehensive, and the stuff that I wanted to write about. And that's kind of what this stream fills the gap on. So ultimately, I'll probably turn this stream into another format at some point, a little more polished, whether that's video or book or blog posts or what, I don't know. But that is the goal. So that is kind of what this is about. And so I have a sort of tentative list of episodes, as I'm calling them, like different things I plan to go through. So starting today, we're going to look at the request lifecycle. So that's basically starting at index.php in the public folder and digging down from there, figuring out how the request is actually taken from the web server, whatever that may be, and turned into something that Laravel and we typically use as the request object. How the kernel works, how routing works, in terms of like matching the correct request, as well as calling the controllers with the right arguments, things like that, and then middleware. Moving on from there, over the next, probably 10 weeks, looking into the service container, how configuration works, like how all the files are loaded and cached and all that kind of stuff. What managers are, so how the storage and cache and logging facades, etc., all work. Then we'll move into queues, busts, and jobs, events and listeners, broadcasting and notification. I've tried to kind of group these into things that sort of logically make sense. The scheduler, because that is a little bit interesting. Session flashing I have here, although I just want to cover sessions. Then we'll dive into the eloquent stuff. So that'll be things like the schema drivers and the query builders, how relationships work, etc. And then lastly, we'll take a look at migrations. So the way that those are applied, rolled back, and things like that. So some of these things may get moved, some of them may get merged, some of them may get skipped entirely because we've covered them sort of by necessity while digging into other stuff. A lot of the stuff I am already familiar with, but a lot of it I'm not. So, this is going to be me just sort of digging into a code base. And hopefully you'll enjoy that experience. You'll see how I do that. It's a very useful skill. And hopefully you'll learn some of the things that I've learned about how Laravel actually works. Because I think it's really important to understand how your tools work. It allows us to do a better job of not misusing them. And also allows us to extend them and get more out of them. So that is the plan. Please, say hi, Captain Sike, in the chat. Let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, my plan is to start right here in the index.php. So this being the entry point for all Laravel apps, we'll go all the way through this. So, excuse me. Thankfully, did remember to bring water. Right. So, very first thing, you probably have seen this. You probably understand this. It's just setting a constant called Laravel start with the current micro time. I believe that this is used internally for all the timings, but you'll see it like on the debug bar as well. So if you use the Laravel debug bar, this is the value that is used to determine the start time and the end time from that for how long your request took. Next up, there's this detection of the maintenance page. So if you are running, hang on a second, I do need to very quickly turn off my other app project. That did not go over to the other screen, did it? There we go. Sail down. Okay. Now I can run sail up over here. So I'm using sail. It's generally what I use. I was using the artisan serve for a long time, but sail has kind of become my go-to. So yeah, now that I have sail up and running, I will do sail artisan. Is it down, I think? Yep. So once you run sail artisan down, this file now exists, and that is how the maintenance stuff starts. And what's interesting about this is this actually happens before the autoloader. So what that means is that you don't actually have access to Laravel inside of this page. And you can create a down file, which is a JSON blob. And basically this is all just like straight PHP from here. But that down will set a whole bunch of things like when to automatically turn it off, I believe, where to redirect, as well as the content of the page. So you can set a template in there. So I'm not sure if that file gets created automatically. I don't think so. Let's go take a look. It does. Okay. Yeah. So if we go ahead and look at our local host right now, that did not. Why have we not? Do I have it on 8080? Yes. Nope. Oh, it might be. Yep. There we go. It's in my debugger. Just turn that off. Okay. So we've seen this 503 service unavailable right now. So if we go ahead and modify that down, we can make it a 404, which would not be a great thing to do, but we can do that. And you'll notice that the template like actually updates in a sane way. But we can also just put in content. So hello world now shows up instead. So that's how that works. So let's bring our application back up. Okay. And we'll go back over here. We'll now see the, actually we're probably not seeing it because it wants me to be running Vite. All right, so here we go. The reason for that is I decided to go with Breeze with React and Inertia.js. So I have it kind of set up for that configuration, but it doesn't change anything we're talking about here. Okay, so now that we have looked at that piece, the next thing that happens is the Composer autoloader gets loaded. So if you're not familiar with that, it's a sort of magic class that gets generated and has all of the autoload stuff in it. And then we actually get into the Laravel application. We actually bootstrap the app. So the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to require your bootstrap app.php. Now, if you're not aware, when you require a file. It can actually return something, and you can assign that to a value, to a variable, and do whatever you want with it. And that's actually what is happening here. It's in parentheses so that it can then be used as an object immediately. But if we jump into the app.php, you can see it just returns application configure. And this is quite different from Laravel 10. So if we go ahead and pull up the Laravel 10 version of this, let's see, Laravel. So we can find this. Laravel 10 bootstrap / app.php. Yeah, we go to this one and switch to 10. So what happened in Laravel 10 is an instance of the app is created. Then the HTTP kernel, the console kernel, and the exception handler are all registered with the service container, and then that instance is returned. And this is kind of the big change that happened in Laravel 11, is they've moved to this application configure function. And what this does is it goes ahead and creates an application builder. And you'll see right here, it creates a new static. And so that's where the new application instance is being created using the base path that is determined here. So super easy. So if we go up here, we can see the base path is the dir name of the directory that we're currently in. So this would be the bootstrap folder, and then the dir name of that would be the top level of your project. So not the app directory, not any of the other directories, the very top level. And then we go ahead and set up the routing. So if you're not familiar with the new way of doing this, rather than having a route service provider and an HTTP kernel where the middleware is defined, it all sort of happens right here in this file. So let's see. So that'll return an application instance. And then the next thing that happens is the handle request function is called. And this is kind of where the request is actually sent through the Laravel framework. And that starts off with capturing the request. So this is the Laravel request class. If you're not familiar with that, it does extend the Symfony request. So it kind of takes all of its internals and implementation from Symfony request. And then it calls this capture method, which actually uses the Symfony request create from globals to capture all of the incoming data. So that'll be your get, post, request, cookies, sessions, etc. All of HTTP server stuff, all the super globals information will be captured there. And then it will use this create from base. And typically wherever you see this sort of from base, typically create from base, but sometimes I think there are some others in there. What this means is to take the Symfony version and turn it into a Laravel version. So anywhere that you're kind of wrapping Symfony stuff, it's not uncommon to see a create from base in there. And that's kind of where the handoff happens between Laravel and Symfony. Request capture will create that request instance from that Symfony request, and then it will call handle request. So we're going to go ahead and dig into handle request. Now we know, because this returns an application instance, that this is a method on the application object. So we go into here. This is the Illuminate Foundation application, and we are going to, I'll get rid of that. Look at the handle request method right here. So what this is going to do is make an instance of the HTTP kernel contract. So this is the HTTP kernel essentially. But this is how you can overwrite it, right? So it was, I think, a little bit easier, or at least a little bit more obvious, because every application provided its own HTTP kernel. So it's a lot easier to customize that in Laravel 10 and earlier. But with Laravel 11, now we're creating an instance of the contract, and so you can define your own instance inside of the service container, and it will create that instead. But by default, this is just the built-in Laravel one, and we can definitely take a look at that. So this is the HTTP kernel. And in here, we should be seeing the middleware stuff, for example. So yeah, so that is that. Let's go back to handle request. I'm not going to dig into how this works, how the service container works yet. I just kind of want to go through the request lifecycle. And so yeah, so it will call the handle method on that HTTP kernel, passing in the request, and then it will send that request through the application. That's what send actually means here. Not sending it back to the HTTP server so it can send it back to the browser, but actually like just executing that request. So let's dig into the handle method, and that is here. So the very first thing it does is set a request started at. Honestly, this could be the Laravel constant that was defined in index.php, or at least based on it. That would actually make that a little bit more accurate. It's going to be microseconds, probably less than that, out of sync. That's fine. Next up, we turn on or based on the setting, enable the HTTP method parameter override. So when you are submitting a form or an XHR request, sometimes you can't, particularly with a form, you can only do post and get, but you want to do a put or a patch or a delete. That's what this enables. So if we dig into that, this just turns it on, and that's default. I don't think it used to be default. You used to have to explicitly enable it. But that allows you to specify the HTTP method in the request body in a post request. So you would always do a post request, and then you would say, actually, this is a patch. Actually, this is a delete. And then we go ahead and why are we in capture still? Hold on. I don't think it actually went to the correct. Application. There we go. Then next thing we're going to do is actually send the request through the router, right? So this, one thing I really like about Laravel's code is it is pretty readable, sort of as English language. So it will pretty much do what it says. So let's jump into this. And then what this will do is set the request instance inside the service container to the request that was sent in. And what that means is the request function, that's when it will start to work. So that helper, or when you use the request facade. And you can see here, it's actually setting up the facade right there. So if you were to manually execute the HTTP lifecycle, which you do it in testing, for example, it always makes sure to override the request with the one that's currently being passed in. And then we're going to come into this bootstrap function. So let's take a look at this. Like, clearly it's going to check if it has been bootstrapped. That's just going to be a Boolean. Yeah, there we go. And then next up, it will, sorry, let's go back to that. Not sure which one of these it is. I think it's this one. Let's see. Where were we? We were here. Okay. Otherwise, it will bootstrap. So let's take a look at this bootstrappers function. So that is an array of bootstrap classes for the application. I don't know where that comes from, so we can dig into that. That is this. We did see this earlier. Okay, so this is going to load the environment variable. So this is where your .n file will be loaded in. Let's take a look into that. Yeah, this is pretty neat. Okay. So it's got this bootstrap function, which if the configuration is cached, it will just return. So this is why once your configuration has been cached, the env functions no longer work as expected because it isn't doing any of this anymore. It will then check to see if either we're in the console and the env argument has been passed and use that env file, or it will use the app.env environment variable to go ahead and figure out which environment we're in, and then append that to the environment file, which is just .env. But you can apparently override that. So I don't know why you would, but that's a thing. And then next up, how do we end up in here? Where are we at? Nope, we want to go back to here. You can see here, this is creating the .env. So this is the actual underlying .env class. And apparently is going to create that with the env repository, as well as the path and file for your current .env file. So that is cool. Yeah, so that's all happening here. So create the .env and write error and die if there is end exception. So that's what's happening here. So that's how we end up with it in the logs if it can't load .n. And what's interesting about that is this is actually just doing console output. And the reason for that is because if it can't load your end file, it can't load your log configuration, most likely. Certainly can't. It's not even going to get to creating your configuration because that actually happens here, right? So that makes a ton of sense. Next up, we're going to load the configuration. I'm not going to dig through this. Like I said, configuration will come later. We'll handle register the exception handler. So this actually is kind of interesting. So we're setting the error reporting to -1, which should turn everything on, I believe, and setting an error handler to handle errors. So that is this function right here. And will nicely ignore deprecations, I think, by default. This is the exception handler. So these are global. And then there's also this as well, which is the register shutdown function. I suspect that this one is going to do a lot. It's likely where all of the sort of shutdown of the framework will happen. So it should be, I expect, where I'm not seeing it here, but this is where I would expect things like deferred functions and whatnot to happen. I do know that happens slightly differently. There was a great video that was on the Reddit, the Laravel subreddit today, about that. But this is actually where I would expect it to happen. This is a very common pattern in PHP, is to use the shutdown function to sort of defer stuff to later on in the request lifecycle. And then if we are not in testing, it will turn off display errors. That is interesting that is hard coded. So even locally, it won't show errors. So that I find interesting. Okay. Move on from here. So registering the facades, registering the providers, and booting the providers. That we'll also get into later. So yeah, it'll get the list of bootstraps, and then it will just go ahead and bootstrap those. So my expectation is it will loop over them, and then it is actually throwing out events. So it'll bootstrapping which bootstrapper it's bootstrapping, and then after it has called the bootstrap method on it. So if we go and look at that load environment variables, this is that kind of entry point. Is the bootstrap function. I'm surprised it's not called handle. That would be sort of more consistent with sort of the Laravel way, or even being an invoke and just having it be an invocable object. So that is an interesting sort of derivation from the norm in Laravel. So we were in here. So it'll call bootstrap on each of those after instantiating it in the service container. Next up, what do we do next? So then we have deferred providers. So let's see if I can I'll pull the docs up on those because I don't remember the exact specifics on deferred providers. There we go. Why are they different? Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is not going to actually create the providers. And yeah, great comment here. So we'll simply spin through each of the deferred providers and register each one and boot them if the application is booted. This should make each of the remaining services available to this application for immediate use. That's interesting. That actually kind of differs from how the docs read. So in the docs, it makes it sound like they're lazy, meaning that nothing happens until you need them. So I'm actually a little surprised that has loaded and registered. We can register with the application, remove the service from this list. Then it will, since it will all be, okay. Yeah, it's actually creating the instance right here. I feel like those docs aren't exactly as I would expect. Like the docs make sense, but the code doesn't seem to bear that out. Let's go back to where those were. That would be here. Okay. Then we have the commands loaded stuff. So what this is going to do is discover artisan commands. Believe. Not sure why that would be happening here. Let's see. Wait. If get class this is so this is in the console kernel. Okay. That is interesting. So in the HTTP kernel, do we have a should discover commands? That seems A little odd, but let's take a look. Should discover, no. Okay. How are we now? We definitely lost track of something a little bit here. Let's go back to here. So we were in the bootstrap. I wonder if I accidentally went into the wrong kernel file. It's not obvious which one it is here. I did. I moved back to the console kernel there, and I think really we should have been in here. Okay, so this is why the deferred providers get loaded on the console. So that's actually a very key difference here. So if you look in the HTTP kernel, we do not load the deferred providers. All we do is bootstrap. Whereas in the console, we go ahead and load the deferred providers. So that's really interesting. Okay, now the docs make a lot of sense. They probably should mention that on the console, these will always get instantiated. They're no longer lazy. Okay, so now that we've figured that out, let's go ahead and go back to the send request through router. And then this is where things for me get a little bit interesting. So this is our first experience with the pipeline class. So I put out a blog post week and a half ago about pipelines. I really like pipelines. I think they're a really good architectural pattern where they make sense. And Laravel has a pretty good implementation that I did originally use in my project bag, but I went with the League one, which is very, very similar, but just ever so slightly more performant, and also not tied to the Laravel framework, right? And so the pipeline in Laravel is what I call an inside-out pipeline. I don't know if that's the official name, but it sounds reasonable. And you should be very familiar with the pipeline if you've ever done middleware stuff. The pipeline basically takes a value and sends it through a series of function calls along with a closure that can be called to call the next thing further down in the stack. This is exactly how middleware works. So let's just go and look at the middleware documentation real quick. Don't know if it's, I think it's here. Oh, maybe it is in here. Oh, we'll just search for it. Middleware, okay. All right, so here is an example of a middleware, right? So it is just a class. It has no interface or anything like that it implements or extends. It has a handle function, which will get two things. The first one is the request, and the second one is this next closure. And the reason that I say that it's inside out is until you can run code on either side of this closure, right? So before you call the next thing in line, you can run some code to modify the request or do whatever you want, log it, etc. Then you can call the next, and you don't have to return it here. You can also get the response, which is what is returned from the handle function of every middleware in this pipeline. And you can modify the response. So what that means is if you wanted to, I don't know, for April Fools, you wanted to make all the text look like it was upside down, you could modify that response and use ASCII tricks, or I guess you like Unicode tricks, to turn everything upside down, right? The upside down turnet, if you're familiar with that. And in fact, you can see it, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so here's an example here. So here they're not doing anything on the way in, they're only doing stuff on the way out. They take the result of the next call and assign it to a variable, then you can do whatever you want with it and then return it, right? So this is the pipeline class, and it's really, really simple. This is, I think, the HTTP. Yeah, this is the routing pipeline. So let's take a look at the base pipeline class real quick. So it gets constructed with the service container. Then you send whatever you're sending through. So in the case of the HTTP lifecycle, it is the request, right? So we can see that right here, send. So the input is the app, so that's the service container. And then we're sending the request. So this is the same request that we started off with all the way over in index.php, right here, this request. So it gets sent through, optionally, the middleware, right? So there is this should skip middleware. So you can disable middleware globally if you wanted to. There are reasons for doing that, testing, etc. So yeah, if the middleware is not disabled, then it is going to, if it is disabled, sorry, it'll just pass through an empty array. So the pipeline just won't do anything. So ultimately what will happen is what gets sent in here is exactly what comes out. Otherwise, it will take the middleware array. And this is created. Let's see. Let's try looking here. Yeah. So if we go ahead and go back to our app, you'll see here the with middleware function is getting passed in the middleware configuration class. And we'll dig into this web function here. So you can either append to the middleware, right? So add it to the end, so it'll run at the very innermost part of this layer of onions, right, on the way in and out. Or you can prepend, so it'll run first. You can also remove and you can replace stuff. So if, for example, you want to change the CSRF middleware that comes with Laravel by default, you would replace it here instead of doing a remove and an append. So this is going to modify the web group. And let's look at append to group. My expectation here. Oh, this modifies it just straight up. That's interesting. Okay. Let's see what these groups look like here. Yeah, this is just modifying the middleware variable. So this is the default set of middleware for web and API. And it'll just modify the right set. And then this presumably, let's see, with middleware, which is called here. Yeah, okay, so what I was looking for, what I didn't see, was the push of the pipeline. Let's go back to here. That is never called. Interesting. I wonder if that's kind of no longer used directly because of the changes in Laravel 11, and it would be something you would write by hand. But these sort of this is the prepend middleware group instead, right? But ultimately, what we're doing is we're defining this set of middleware, which, as I mentioned, as we saw earlier, is defined. Where did it go? We did see that list. I don't remember exactly where it was. See if I can quickly find it. That's okay. Okay, so yeah, so going back to our kernel here, where we had the pipeline being called. Where is it? If you're not familiar, Command-Shift-E on a Mac at least will pull up this recent locations. Super handy command that I've been sort of adding to my muscle memory. Okay, so that's where this middleware comes from, right? So ultimately, whatever the defaults are, plus whatever you put in your app.php, that's what will be passed into the through method. And then it will call the then function. So this is actually what executes the pipeline. There's actually two ways to do that. So I believe there's a then return. Yeah. So the difference between then and then return is then will accept a callable that will be like your final pipe, if you will. And it runs at the very end on the result of the pipeline. So whatever is sent through, so this request will go through all of the pipes, and then the result of that will be passed into whatever closure or callable. I guess it has to be a closure that is given to the then function. Let's take a look at then. So this is sort of the entirety of how the pipeline works. So it just uses array reduce, and it takes the list of pipes. So that's your middlewares in this case, and it reverses it because it's going to start with the innermost one first. It then takes the carry. So carry is essentially the current value of the request. Let's see here. Yeah, so ultimately it comes down to this right here, which is that if this method exists, then it will call it passing in the parameters, which is kind of whatever was passed through the initial send and what is returned, as well as the next, whatever next in line is. What's interesting, excuse me, is that the method by default, right, is handle. If we go look at the docs, that's the method that we are told to use for middleware. But there's actually a function called via. Let me go look at that right here. You can specify what that method is. So if you want it to be anything other than handle, you can just, inside of here, you could put via foo. And then instead of calling handle, it will call foo on every one of those pipes. The key point here is that it's the same for every single pipe, so you can't mix and match. And I don't know why you would want it to be anything other than handle, but there you go. What is happening here is it's trying to figure out whether or not it is an invocable middleware. So that's what this one is. So if it's callable, then it has an invoke method, and it will just call the object, right? It could be a closure as well, or something like that. But if it is directly callable, then it just calls it. If it is not an object, let's see here. It gets resolved from the service container. Okay, that's interesting. I've not actually seen this one in use. Never used this one. I guess that would be the class name version, actually. So if we go look at this, our middleware is just a string, right? So that's where this gets instantiated. Like handle inertia request is right over there in the pipeline. So this is where we're going to create that middleware instance. Otherwise, it's already an object, so we'll just make it a callable. Okay, that is interesting. So there's two ways we could do this now, actually. This is new. So this actually could be closure from callable, right? Yeah, could do that as well. Turn it into a closure and pass in those two, I would assume. You could do that and just make it into a closure, but that's fine. So what that means is that if you wanted to have a middleware over here that was new CSRF, like if you want to do that, right, you could do that as well. So that's how all of those different cases get handled. Where are we? Pipeline. Okay. So again, we've either called it directly here, or we created something that is callable, and we're going to call it here. This is the carry, so this is the return, so this is that response object, right? And then we handle the carry, which just returns it, which is interesting. Okay. As I mentioned, there is two ways through the pipeline. Then return is very similar, except it just returns the value. So it literally calls then. So rather than calling the destination, which is that function that gets called after, or rather in addition to it, it returns a value. So this is the default destination in that case, right? So it just takes in essentially what was returned from the end of our pipeline, and then returns it. So this is, if you want to use pipelines directly, these are the two ways you would call it. You would either have this with some sort of destination that does something, and we'll dig into what that looks like in a moment. Or you would call then returned. So yeah, I just want to dig into this a little bit. So this is the routing pipeline. And so this is where whatever you return from your controller gets turned into a response, right? So we can see that right here. If you return something that implements the responsible interface, then it's going to, let's get this nesting correct, create, or rather fetch the request class, and call to response on whatever responsible thing that you have returned, right? Or it's going to return it directly. So if it's JSON, then, like if you return an array, I'm not sure if it's hitting this or if it's getting turned into a responsible before that. And then the other thing that's in here is handling of exceptions. So I'm going to guess that, yeah, there is a default implementation of that where it just throws the exception. But in this case, it instead sends it through the exception handler, which will render it either as stack trace or a nice HTTP exception. That is why this does nothing, because it is overridden here. And it's the only place that it's done. So that's interesting. All right, let's dig in a little bit more. Let's figure out what's happening in this dispatch to router. If you have any questions, by the way, please just toss them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. And thank you for sticking around. All right, so let's check out this. So my expectation is exactly what's happening here is that it is returning a closure, right? So we knew that because it's calling then, and that accepts a closure. So that's expected. So let's dig into what this does. Takes the request. So that is the incoming request. That's interesting. It must call this in the middle of the onion. I don't see any other way that would work. Because obviously you have the request coming in, you modify the request, you add your headers, you do whatever you want to do on the way in. And then you need to dispatch it through the router. And then you get a response which comes back out through the onion. So that is important. Just that we understand that is happening. Okay, so it takes the incoming request. Now this is the modified request and sets it into the service container. So it overwrites the version in the service container. Interestingly, doesn't reset the facade here. I would expect it to do so, but that's okay. And then it's going to dispatch it to the router. So this router is the Illuminate routing router. So it'll call dispatch on that, sending the request into it. Okay, let's take a look at that. So it sets the current request and dispatches it to the route. Then it will run the route after finding it. So do you have a roadmap? Yes. I do have a, I'll just quickly skip to that real quick. So here, so request lifecycle, service container, configuration, managers. So that's like storage, cache, logging, how all those work. Queues, bus, he wanted to say buses. There's only one bus. And jobs, events and listers, broadcasting notifications, the scheduler, sessions, eloquent, and migrations. Some of these may get merged together. Some of them may span more than one session. So, and if there's anything not on this list that you would like me to cover, please ask. Sorry, going back to where we were. So let's find the route. Okay, so we're going to dispatch a routing event. And then we're going to match the route. You'll notice that it sets current here. So when you run, I believe that works. When you run that, that's where that'll pull from. So let's see how match works. Okay, so we want to be in here. Okay. So first of all, it is going to get the method, presumably of the HTTP request. If we find a matching route for this current request method, we can, great. We can just return it so that it can be called by the consumer. Otherwise, we will check for routes with another verb. So like if you do a GET request, but you only have a post to find. I know there's like a specific error that happens when you do that. So maybe that's, excuse me, where that happens. All right, let's dig into match against routes. Ooh, okay. fallbacks and routes. Okay, so it's first going to find the fallback routes, which I am not familiar with. Let's do a quick search for that. Fallback routes. Here we go. Using the route fallback method, you may define a route will be executed when no other routes matches the incoming request. Typically, unhandled requests automatically render 404. However, since you would typically define the fallback route within your routes web file, all middleware in the web. Okay. Interesting that this node is in here when it's registered specially. And then we do this here. So I'm not entirely remembering what the partition function does. So let's go look at that. Partition. There we go. Partition method may be combined with PHP array destructuring to separate elements that pass a given truth test from those that do not. Okay, so I don't think it matters if you do it last, because this is just going to go find it anyways. My question is this is an array. Sorry, this is a plural. So there can be multiple fallbacks? That doesn't seem to jive. Yeah, there's no like matching or anything on here. Maybe you could though. So you know how you can have like route conditions. I wonder if that is doable on the fallback, which would make sense. Lord Nick, I'm not working on anything specific right now, or rather I am, but it's not a project. I'm just digging into Laravel source code. So I don't think that composer package is going to be of use. Okay, yeah. So that's what I was saying. So that's why you could have multiple fallbacks. That makes sense. All right, so it's going to take the. What I don't understand. Oh, I do know exactly what. Okay, that's interesting. So the documentation says that you need to register it last. What the code says is it doesn't matter because it's going to take the incoming routes, find all of the ones that are fallbacks and not fallbacks, and then merge them here, essentially putting them at the end again. So that warning can actually go away, in my opinion. All right, and then it's going to find the first one that matches this closure. So let's take a look at the matches function. Compile routes. Oh, interesting. So this is now Symfony stuff at the end here. All right, so let's go back. I'm not digging into Symfony, to be clear. That is not the intention. So, get the validators. Okay. Okay, so there are 4 things here. This is unlike anything else I've seen in Laravel source code, frankly, where it's like 2 and 2. Okay, so it's going to match on the URI, presumably the path, the method, the scheme, so HTTP versus HTTPS, and the host. I don't think most people use these two. I have done it, though. I've definitely had applications where, depending on the host name that was used to access it, it would have different routes internally. So, Okay, so if we're not checking the method, which I'm not sure why we wouldn't be doing that. I'm not sure there's a... Oh, there is. Okay, so match against routes. So yeah, it's always going to be true. Yeah, so this is a great... thank you for this chat comment here. I'm just going to try to... Can I make that show up on screen? Is that a thing? Not sure, but I'm just going to copy it into my code just so we can see it. Yeah, so this is what's being talked about here. So obviously you have coded in a chat box, so it's not great formatting. So let's figure that out real quick, or close enough. Yeah, so this is why you would have multiples, presumably. So this fallback would be for API requests. You could have another fallback, which is for I don't know, admin requests or something like that, right? So that's why it is an array, presumably an array. Okay, so sorry, let's continue digging in here. Okay, so if the validator matches or does not match, we return false. Otherwise, we return true. I kind of want to throw my debugger at this, and actually see how we end up with that. So let's go into our web.php. I just want to see what routes we have. Okay, so we should be able to pull up the login route, which will be defined over here, right? Yeah, login. So let's jump into here. Well, we're too late by the time we get there, actually. So let's just do it from the index.php. And we're gonna break. I'm gonna break here. Okay, let's turn this on. And let's go to the login route. Okay. Okay, so we're digging into this find route, right? That's where we're at. So this is dispatching that event, and then we're going into match. All right, so as I said, this should be getting it based on the method, so we can this should just be get, right? Yep. And what is it? What is this function? Get. Okay, so it is just doing like an array get based on that. So let's just see get routes. Yeah, so this is every single route that we defined in our routes file. So presumably somewhere in there is our login route. So now we're going to have all of the get routes. That would be, yeah, so we only have 13. So there's 23 routes, but 13 of them are get routes. So that's a really quick match there. And that's actually probably why this never passes in the including method, because it's already been limited to that. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out how this is actually matching. So my expectation is fallbacks is going to be empty because I don't have any. Oh, there is. Yeah, it's empty, right? But as I said, it is going to append it to the end. And then we want to make sure, I'm going to jump into the matches function because otherwise we're going to lose this debugging. Okay, so we compile the route. We're going to get the validators. So the current validator is the URI validator. And this is the route. And that is the request. And it's going to see if it matches. Okay, so this is literally just the path. And this is where it's okay. So yes. Okay. So as part of that, oops. As part of that Symfony compiled stuff, that's where it's actually taking the route that you define with its placeholders and giving back a regex that matches. And that is a very interesting regex. I don't know what all of these flags are. But that is how it's going to match the path. Okay, so it is doing a regular expression match ultimately at the end of the day. So I just want to see, do I have any routes that do have... I don't think there's any by default that have some sort of... no, I don't see any. Yes, this one. Okay. So once I get to this route, I should get a regular expression that will match and have these as submatches. All right, so let's go back to here. So this is going to be a false, right? So yeah, so the path is /login, and it's going to compare it against that regex, which is the Sanctum CSRF cookie one. And of course, it's not going to match. So that is going to return false. I do want to get to the one for... let's just show $this URI so we can kind of track it. All right, so we're going to put a breakpoint there. Oh, we hit the one that matched. That's why I didn't get to it. Okay, that's cool. But yeah, so that is how it's going to match the URL, even with parameters in it, right? And this is going to be like 99% of route matches is going to be this one. This one presumably is if you have a default route for a method, and as I mentioned, this is for like HTTPS, and this will be host. But most of them will match on the URI validator. What I find interesting there then is it's going to try all 4 of these on each route. So what that means is for the first route, let me just refresh this and I'll explain what I'm talking about here. So because this is an array of each of the validators, it means that for this particular route, so the Sanctum CSRF cookie, it's going to run each of the validators. So all 4 of them, because including method is true by default. Rather than doing like all of the path validators, then all of the method validators, then all of the schema validators, and then all of the host validators. Given that I think most people will only be doing path matches, I wonder if that's the right approach. I wonder if it would make more sense to only run the path validators first. And if none of those match, then fall back to method, then fall back. You know what I mean? There might be an optimization that can be had there. Anyways, so this is how we check to see if it matches. I'm just going to stop that. We are here. Route collection. Right, so ultimately from this, we'll get whichever route matches, and then it will handle the matched route. So if no route is matched, what's going to happen there? Does that? Okay, yeah. So if it isn't null, so there is a route match, it will bind the request and return the compiled route with the request bound to it, including the route parameters being set. So at this point, any route parameters that we have, so ID and hash, for example, will be populated from the route itself. And then, here we go. If it isn't going to match, then it'll check for alternative verbs. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where it does give that specific method not allowed, 4 or 5. If you, for example, call get on a route that exists but only has a post method allowed for it. Lord Nick, I'd be happy to check that out after the stream or towards the end of the stream, but I don't want to interrupt what we're doing right now. Okay, so this returns the route. So this is the match. So we're back in the router with the current route. We set the container on the route, so that's going to be just passing through the application instance. And then it sets the route instance. Okay. Then we run it. Cool. So that's kind of interesting. This could just pull the route back out of the container rather than passing it in here. Like that would technically work. It's probably less efficient, but so it sets the route resolver to essentially just return the route because we've already found it. It dispatches the route matched event, and then we execute. So let's see here. We're going to dig into run route within stack first. So this is where we decide if we're going to skip the middleware. Okay, so now we're actually in that pipeline stuff, right? Interestingly, again, so this is actually another pipeline. Why do we have 2? I wonder if this is it's global middleware is the first one. This is route specific middleware. Yes, the internet is a series of tubes. That is absolutely correct. Okay, so this is where we execute the action itself. So is it a controller action? If so, run controller. So presumably, okay, so if it's a string, that's it. So literally, if the second argument of the callable that you passed is a string, then it's guaranteed to be a controller action, so long as it's not a serialized closure. So that would be a thing. Okay. Let's go back to here. Where were we? Here, okay. So then we're going to run the controller, right? So this is the controller dispatcher, which is going to dispatch. And this is where it decides what the parameters are going to be. So this is where we resolve all of the service container stuff on top of the route parameters. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so this is going to do reflection and figure out what is needed. And then if method exists, call action. What does that do? Laravel controller call action. Someone else has the same question. This is legacy, I'm guessing. I wonder if the default controller has this defined. Let's take a look. No. Huh. I genuinely don't know what that is for. And it would call that instead of calling the method name. That's interesting. Yeah, I get the call action is basically call user func array. But why? Is the question. I guess it gives you a little bit more control in your controllers. So like here, if I define call action, right? The method is particularly useful because it allows you to dynamically call controller methods with parameters passed via the route. But that happens anyways. But I can see other options where that would be useful. So if you wanted to do some setup for something that can't be resolved from the service container automatically, this would be where you could do that, right? So it takes in, what does it take in? The method and the parameters, right? So where did my, yeah. So if we do method parameters, that's actually it's just an array. Params, right? You could do some setup here, right? Oh, they can't be resolved equals true, right? And then you would call good grief. Right. So I guess that's some flexibility there, but it doesn't now. Because it doesn't exist. There's no like base controller that has a call action defined on it. Sorry, Lord Nick saying that when a route is matched and points to a specific controller and method, Laravel internally uses call action to invoke the specified method. It doesn't. If call action does not exist, then it's already resolved the parameters up here. It's using the dispatch method. So it will go ahead and call the method directly and splat out those values. And I have just realized I do have another screen here. We can actually see the chat. So yeah, that'll be in the stream. Cool. All right, so we have about 40 minutes left, so I'm going to continue on with this. So this will we know call the method in the controller. Let's go back to wherever that dispatch was called, which is going to be a ways back now. I'm going to jump to here because I believe it was somewhere in here. Oh, it's in the run controller, right? So if it's not a controller action, then it's a callable, right? So it's either a single action controller or a closure, and it will just call that. And presumably we'll also figure out the correct values to pass in. Now, hang on, where did that go? Callable dispatcher. Okay, so we need to go look at this. Yeah, so it'll just resolve the parameters and splat those into whatever the callable is. Yeah, so one thing you can also override the call action method in your own controller if you want to add custom behavior before or after calling a controller method. For instance, you might want to log something before calling any controller action. So I would argue that you should use middleware for that. So yeah, I'm not really seeing a lot of value in it. It's there, I guess, but it could probably go away at this point. It's probably legacy. I imagine it's been there for a while. Okay, so that is where we run the callable. And then ultimately, we throw an exception. Let's go back to where this is called. And then the result of that is whatever your controller action or your whatever returns. And this is where we prepare the response. So, our first instance of tap. Okay. This function comes up a lot. It basically just lets you call a thing with a thing. Like literally whatever you pass in as the callback, it will call it with whatever you pass in as the value. Yeah. Not a lot to tap. I do want to dig into it more at some point because like there's this higher order proxy target thing. I don't really know what this is doing. So tap allows you to call a callback on a given value, perform some actions on it, and then return the original value rather than the result of the callback. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so that's what it's for. But wait, hang on. Oh, okay. So what this is going to do is it's going to create the response and pass that into tap as the value. And then it's going to have this closure that will dispatch the response prepared with that response in it event. But it will then return the response. Okay, so the alternative to this, if we were to write this out without tap, would be I don't want to do that. Like that's what this is doing right now. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Cool. All right. So what I'm really interested in is this to response. So if you return a responsible directly, then it will call to response, passing in the request. If it's a PSR 7 response interface, then it will create a response using the HTTP Foundation factory. So this is going to be, why is that not resolving correctly? I might need yeah, I don't have this installed, presumably. But I don't need it. If it is a model, it'll turn it into a JSON response. If it's a stringable, it'll turn it just into a text response. HTML. Interesting. Okay. I bet Blade returns stringables. Otherwise, if it's a Symfony response or some sort of array, JSON-able something, it will... if it's not a Symfony response. Control-Shift-I. Wait, what? Sorry, I do want to check that. Control-Shift-I. Command-Shift-I maybe on a Mac? That doesn't work for me. Anyways, if it's not a Symfony response, but it is one of these types of collection-y type things, Mac, then it will turn it into a JSON response. Otherwise, if it's not a Symfony response, why do we have these? It'll return a okay. So if it is a Symfony response, then it's not going to get modified at all. That's what ultimately happens down here. So anything that isn't a collection type thing will just be turned into text HTML. I feel like you could collapse this one and this one down. No, that makes sense because this is an object-like thing. It would pass, I think, one of these tests. So you'd end up with a not stringable in here, just to then have it fall through to here. That's fine, I guess. Okay, so gets the status code and then prepares the response. Okay, so if it's informational or empty, set the content to null, remove these headers. And there's an I set right there, okay. I mean, it's good that it's doing it, but like, yeah. Otherwise, we find the content type. Format, get request format. Okay, so yeah, this is going to be an incoming request, right? So if you expect JSON, then you'll get JSON back. Set the character set, set the content type. Always to text HTML with a character set of UTF-8, or whatever the character set is. Oh, if it doesn't have a content type. Oh, so this is where it's defaulting to text HTML. Otherwise, if there is a content type and it is a text type and it doesn't have a character set already, then we're going to add the character set. Okay. Set the content length, or rather remove the content length if transfer encoding is set. If it's head, then we okay. So when you set the content, that's when it sets the content length. And that's why it's getting it first before it unsets it. Then it sets it again, explicitly. Maybe is Command Y. Yep, that did it. That's pretty cool. Thank you. I will try to remember that. Sets the protocol to... What if you're doing HTTP 2? Anyways, send extra expire info headers. So if we're on 1.0 and not 1.1, and we have cache control set to no cache, yep, then it needs to send the... Okay, so these are the old style cache headers. Ensure... oh, interesting. What is this? Command Y, we said? Okay. It even includes the comment. That's great. Okay, yeah. For older versions of IE, I believe we need to remove cache control for TLS or SSL. That's how old it is. Okay. If it's secure, set all the cookies... Interesting. So if we're over TLS, then all cookies are set to secure by default. Okay, so that is the prepare method. We were in the router. Okay, so that's how we get our response. That is cool. And we're back to the tap, right? So we prepare the response and return it from the pipeline. Well, no, we don't return it from the pipeline. Yes, we... Yes, we return the response. And I think that's basically it. I think we've gone all the way through the whole stack. Is there anything that I missed? I don't believe so. Let's go back to our index. So we were in handle request. Ah, yes, there is. So all we've done is the handle. Let's check out what send does. So this is important. So this is where the defer stuff and whatnot ends up coming into play, right? So this is actually sending the content to the browser, right? To at least to the HTTP server. So it says the header sends the contents. If it's not set to flush, then it just returns. So presumably you could send the buffer multiple times. So it has been a long time since I've done it, but like there used to be times where you used to like output part of a page. It was taking so long, or you were waiting on a long running process, right? And so you would output what you had so far. I don't think anybody really does that these days because we have polling and WebSockets and things like that. There's just better ways to do it. But yeah, ultimately, then it will call one of these things here to actually flush that request out. And the important part here is what happens next. So we then run terminate. And I believe it's in terminate where ultimately we're going to do things like deferring. Yeah. So we dispatch the terminating. We terminate the middleware. Oh, right. Yes. So Middlewares can have a handle function and a terminate function. And the terminate function will run after the request has finished. So if you wanted to, for example, track I know Laravel has this sort of already done, but if you wanted to track the timing of something within your middleware, right? So you would do, before you call next, you would check the timestamp. After you call next, you would create the timestamp, and then terminate is where you could do like the pushing it to your metric service. That would be an outbound HTTP request, which would take some time, right? So that's why you want to do it after you terminate, or rather in terminate after you send the request. Okay. So now what happens here in terminate? Terminating callbacks. The array of terminating callbacks. Let's see. Where does... Interesting that this is used in the view. Oh, okay. So this is where caching is flushed, for example. In the blade side of things. Okay. We are in... Where was that getting called? Here. Not quite sure why we're setting time zones here, but okay. Request lifecycle duration handlers. Yeah, that's what I thought this was going to be. So this allows you to have like slow request logging. That's actually really cool. Yeah, so the reason that it is setting the... so I want to go back to where I was. The reason it's setting the time zone, I believe, is because it recorded the request started at in a specific time zone and wants to make sure it's still in it. And that was sort of outside of the user's code, right? So yeah, that's actually pretty cool. And then from here, where do we get? Where is this called? That's it. So what I didn't see is where the deferred stuff happens. I would have expected that here in terminate. Oh, that's right. There's a middleware for it, I believe. I did just watch that video this morning. Vendor. Laravel. Framework. Source. HTTP middleware. Didn't see where it was. Let's just look for deferred. Deferred callback. Yeah, here's the defer function. We have this here. Yes, okay. So this is a middleware. So the invoke deferred callbacks middleware in the terminate. So using that existing functionality that was already there is going to call those deferred functions based on this collection that is populated using the defer function. Every time you call defer, it adds it to that collection, and then ultimately here it will execute them. All right, I think that takes us all the way through the life cycle. So back to handle request. Yep, here we go. So that is it. So handle request here, is executed right there. And that is the end of the request. So I hope that you have enjoyed this. As I said, this is kind of my process, just digging in. I don't know everything. This is definitely a learning experience for me as well. And my intention next time is to dig into the service container. So we'll be looking at binding, so how we get stuff into the container, resolving contextual binding, singletons, and service providers, and how those are called as well. If you have any questions, I'm going to go take a quick break. I do have workers on my list, or rather jobs down here. If you do have any questions, I'm going to take a quick break, have a drink, and just rest my voice for a moment. So I'm gonna shove it into my be right back mode. And if you have any questions, I will come back and answer those. All right, so I think you're missing markdowns. I'm realizing my be right back screen should probably have the chat on it, so I'll make that change for next time, and try to keep the chat up more. Is this window legible at this size as opposed to the sort of the full size window? Just want to make sure that people can read what I'm looking at. You know what, Lord Nayak, you say dark mode will be better. I really don't like dark mode. I'm light mode all the way. I do use, like, I have what's it called? So I have night shift on automatically, and I do go into dark mode later at night. But generally, I prefer light mode. Markdown is a good shout, and you've actually reminded me the blade isn't in here. So I will also add blade and under that. Ooh, whoopsie. I will put markdown question mark. So, oh, I thought I had facades in here. I don't. I will do that after the service container, or maybe as part of the service, to even GitHub Copilot. So now DTO is an interesting one. So I do have my own library called Bag. Bag value objects. I didn't want to shill this on the stream. That's kind of not the point of this. And that's obviously where I'd want to go. And I don't want people to think that that's kind of what I'm doing here. This is really just an educational thing. It is bagvalueobjects.com. I'll drop that into the chat. Oh, it wants me to log into to Twitch again. I already have an account. Log me in. Cool. Just throw that up there. Not do that off screen. Could we go off screen? I need to switch desktops. There we go. Okay, so Twitch. There we go. Okay. As far as custom error handlers, that feels to me like using the framework, which again is not the point of this set of streams. My goal is to educate on how the framework works, but we can maybe look into it. I'll add that to the end as a 12 error handling. Error handling in general is probably a good one. So we'll definitely check that out, and that'll I think educate on at least how custom error handlers function and kind of get that covered. So all right. Well, that is everything for today. Again, thank you so much. Drivers are in there, so I've got managers right here. So storage, caching, login. That's that. I'm going to cover that. I've done a lot of work building out custom drivers particularly for queues and stuff. All right. So I am going to check out this link here. Hopefully it's nothing rude. Okay, so this is I'm a very big fan of strict types. However, I worry that non-internal types, so like turning primitive types in PHP into objects, is going to be too slow. Obviously, there's a huge amount of value in terms of type safety. It would be great if these were erasable. That is, if they didn't do anything in production. But this does look kind of cool. So I will definitely look into this a little bit more. Are you doing anything like with your ints? Are you like using BC Math or anything under the hood? Or is it just bound to okay? So they're more valuable than just like straight ints in PHP. So cool. I will definitely look into this. You got some minor check index.php on the root. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Yeah, one thing actually, sorry, slightly related to this, but a little tangential that I ran into today with Bag. is I wanted to be able to easily determine whether or not a particular value should be sent in the response. So I have a value object that has an optional key, and I'm using it to construct the body of a API request. And that API does not accept null as like the same as an unset value. And so while my value object does, the API doesn't. And I needed a way to hide that if it wasn't set. But what if it was explicitly set to null, right? You can't do that. So what I'm looking for is the Go way of doing things, which is the undefined value, right? We only get that accidentally in PHP. Can I show you an example? Maybe. I mean, it doesn't really matter what this like. So yeah, let's say I have this. I have to do the equals null to make it optional, right? And so if I do this, we'll get the object we expect. But when I JSON encode that, what I would end up with is something that looks like this, right? And I need to not send this. And so I'm looking for a way to have this not be defined. To string. It's not the it's how I understand it. It's within my value object like package, how I figure out which behavior to have, right? Because sometimes you want this, sometimes you don't. And so what I want to be able to do is add a an attribute there that says if it's empty, then omit it from the JSON. I'm doing a whole bunch of other stuff with JSON as well, right? So like changing or potentially mapping the names, etc. Right? So this feature does not exist in PHP. Like there's no way to reliably do this. What I could do is allow you to specify some sort of empty string here, like some sort of empty value, that if it equals that, then it would just omit it. So you could potentially say like empty is your special value, and you would like magically or automatically set it to empty. I don't know, there's ways to do it. The other option is some sort of optional object. The problem there is the type hinting here. And so I can make it work with some sort of optional like thing here. I just need to, like, there's some assumptions in the code that you're not using union types very intentionally. They're not supported. So I need to make some fairly significant changes for that to work. So. All right, let's take a look at that. Hold on. Sail Tinker. Ooh. JSON encode. New bag. Yeah, see, that does exactly what I expected to do. Yeah, see, this is the thing, is sometimes you want to send a null. Sometimes you don't. Null is not necessarily the same as empty. In PHP, we have undefined or uninitialized, which is where it has no value ever. But you can't have a default value in the constructor for the property promotion. So make it nullable like that. Like you can't make this optional without giving it a default value. So you can never be in that uninitialized state. Anyways, this is way far afield what the stream is about. So thank you again so much for all of your time. Very much appreciate all of your participation. I'm hoping to be back same time-ish next week. I'm going to be... I'm going to be playing around with the times for this to see if I can get a better time zone to accommodate more people. I'm also going to be like doing a bit better job of like advertising it out and stuff. But yeah, this whole video should be available on the Twitch page for 7 days, I think. And I will grab a copy. And at some point turn it into something hopefully a little neater. So, yeah, thank you for all your participation. Very much appreciate you and your time. You're not wrong that it will work, but it will not work in the case that I want to make it generic and use annotations to figure out which values to omit and when. So, all right, thank you very much for your time. Same time next week as of now.